Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Responsive Web Design 2. This is Lecture 6. Today, what we're going to be covering is a Flexbox demonstration. We're going to have a mock-up that we're going to build just the layout structure of in class. We're going to do that together. And we're going to use Flexbox to build that structure. Okay, and then we'll talk about your next exercise landing page. Okay, and that's what we have for today. As far as announcements, we have the sign-in sheet that's being passed around, and that's it. Are there any questions before we get started with today's lecture? Your page redesign assignment is due tonight. How's that? Okay, not so. You should have some time to work on that if you need to work on that in class. All right, so Flexbox layout. That's what we're going to be working on today. There are really no slides today. So for this exercise, we do have some files that we need to download. So if you go out to the course website, that's mdac.github.io/mtm6201-w20. Go to the content page, and we'll go to week 3. That's what we're covering today. Again, just going to go over these again. We have the topics page, Flexbox layout. We have our assignments, Flexblocks, which we worked on Tuesday. Here's the landing page assignment, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We have our slides for today, and then we have this Flexbox layout. Now, take note, there's 2 versions here. The first version is the starter files. That's what we're going to start with to build from. There's also the completed version. This completed version will have everything and maybe even a little bit more of what we're going to cover today. You are more than welcome to download the completed version, and then you can just sit and listen. But if you want to follow along, download the starter version. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and click on the starter version. And this will just be a zip file that will download to your computer. While that's downloading, inside these starter files are just the mockup files that we're going to be using to build this site. We're going to actually create all the files that will actually be for the site. That's the HTML page and the CSS page. So once you have that downloaded, go ahead and open up the zip file or extract the zip file, and then go ahead and move the file to your MTM6201 folder. You may wish to rename this file or this folder, and that's perfectly fine. We're not going to be doing anything beyond this class. I'm going to leave it alone. Now I'm going to open up the folder inside of Visual Studio Code so that I can see the files. And if you open up the folder, we can take a look at what's inside. So inside you will find a mockup.ping file as well as a mockup.xd file. If you do not have xd installed, you'll have to install it to be able to view the file. You can always rely on the ping. We're just going to be looking at this for general basis. Again, we're not going to be worried too much about being precise, adding colors, adding fonts. We're just looking at the base structure of the page. That's all we're going to create today. So we're going to leave fonts alone. We're just going to use a lot of gray boxes, essentially. Again, we're just looking for the structure. So you can look at the XD. Let's see if I can just open up the ping and see if that's going to be good. Make it a little bigger. Yeah, it's got a good size. Okay, so I'm just going to work with off the ping here because that's pretty much all I need to, or all we need to view this structure of the page. So, has everyone got it downloaded? No, it's only giving us one version. Okay, so this mockup only gives us one version, and I will show you how we can use that one version and make good ideas of what the mobile version will look like. Okay, and a lot of times, especially with Flexbox and CSS Grid, we let it create the mobile version for us, so to speak. Okay, and I'll show you how that works here in a moment. But let's just look at this. Hopefully everyone has this up now, and they can look at it in their version. If not, we can look at the projector. Let's just look at this site and see what we have. All right, so at the top, we have this nice big banner. Pretty common these days. Inside of that header, we also have a navigation and this kind of call to action text, middle there. Now we have the next section. So you can imagine this as being a section. Then the following section here, we have some text, again with a call to action, and an image. Okay, they're side by side. The next section, we kind of have this about section is what I'm calling it here. And we got some boxes that are in sort of a 3x2 grid. We have a section for a video. Then we have these featured projects section. Again, it's very similar to this one up here, by the way. It's these text images side by side. They alternate, though. Okay, so the second one alternates, and then the third one's back to the way it is. And then we have the footer. Okay, this is a relatively simple single-page site. Now, when working with Flexbox, the first thing we have to remember is that Flexbox is a single-dimensional layout, which means that if we want to lay something out in 2 dimensions, we have to create nested Flexbox, okay, nested Flexbox containers. All sites, by the way, are columns at their highest level. Okay, so when you think about it, all sites are generally columns. This is one big column, all right, with multiple rows. So here's a row, and here's a row. Okay. From inside of that big column, we will create another Flexbox container, which will then create additional columns, and sometimes even inside that, we'll create rows. So, but keeping that in mind, that if on the highest level, everything is a column, we're going to start from there, and we're going to lay out our HTML at the very high level. And we're going to dig deeper in to create this structure. Okay? All right, so we're going to refer back to this often, but for now, let's jump back to our text editor. Okay, so hopefully you've got your folder opened up into VS Code, and you notice that there's no HTML file in there, so we need to create an HTML file. Let's go ahead and do that. Again, you can create a new file by clicking the new file icon next to the directory name. So if we just click on that icon, it'll prompt you for a name of the file, and we're going to call it index.html. I'm going to hit enter. So this is going to be our base HTML page, and now we need the basic HTML5 structure. Again, you should always just go ahead and use Emmet or some sort of snippet to create this. Okay, Emmet's built into VS Code, so we'll go ahead and use that. If you use its exclamation point tab, we'll create this basic structure for you. This way we don't have to worry about the doc type, adding the lang, adding our meta tags. It's already done for us, and we won't forget them. So we should always use a snippet when creating an HTML page. The other advantage we can do is it'll allow us to update certain parts of it. You'll notice some of them are highlighted. We can tab to those sections. Now, most of these we're going to leave alone, but we're going to tab to the title where it says document, and we're going to update the title. This is another thing that lots of people forget, even professionals. They forget to update the title of their HTML page, so we want to do that. So we're going to call this one Flexbox Layout. All right, so now we need to add our style sheets. Now that we have our HTML, the basic structure there, let's go ahead and add our style sheets. Now, there is this normalize.css style sheet. This is quite common to add a reset or normalize to allow your site to be easier to develop across browsers. The attempt, especially with normalize, is to make all browsers by default view the site the same way. Okay, that makes it easier on us to have to not hack a way to make the site look the same on all the browsers. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and add that one. So right after our title, we add our link tag. So there's a shortcut for this, by the way. If you type in link:CSS and then hit tab, that will create the link tag for you. Now it's already highlighted my style.css because that's what it's preset to. We're going to change that to normalize. So I'm just going to type in normalize there. Okay, so that gets me that tag. After the normalize tag, we're going to add our own CSS. So we're going to call link again, :CSS, and we're going to hit tab. Now for this one, we're going to call it style.css. Okay? Now there is no style.css file inside of our project, but I'm going to show you a little trick inside of VS Code. If you hover over it, hover over the link, it says follow link, and then you can hit command click. Now I'm on a Mac, so it says command. I believe on Windows it's control. Right, so if we control click on this, or command click, it's going to ask you there's no available file. Would you like to create that file? And you can click yes. Okay, and it will automatically create that file for you. Little trick if you don't want to create it. Okay, so automatically create that file for you and opens up for us. So we have that already. All right, so since we're inside of our style sheet, we're going to add a few styles to just add some structure to our page. Even though we don't even have any HTML in it, we're going to add these styles anyway. All right, so these are just base styles, and mostly this is base styles to create our layout, not necessarily ones that we would leave in place for the end site. But we're not building the end site, we're just building our layout structure. So I'm just going to call these base styles. All right. The first style we're going to do is we're going to set our box sizing to border box. And we're going to do this for everything. Yep, we're going to do this for everything so we don't have to worry about it. Okay? So you do that using the star. That will apply to everything. And then we can do box sizing, and we'll do border box. Okay? That way it's just out of the way. We don't have to forget about it. Because we're going to be adding padding to a lot of our elements so that they actually take up space because there won't be content in them right away. So that way we can kind of see the structure as we're building. Yes? With the colon in front of it? So there's pseudo elements before and after, and that applies to them as well. Okay, so we won't be working with before and after, so we're not adding them here. Okay, but so when we work with, so CSS allows you to create elements that don't exist inside the HTML. And two very common ones is before and after, which create essentially an HTML element that's not there. Okay, now when you use the star, it doesn't apply to those pseudo elements. So sometimes you have to add them to it. We're not adding them here because we're not going to be working with before and after in this project. Yes? Okay, let's see if I can explain this again. Okay, so when you have an HTML element, right, let's say we have a div. So by the way, the question is asking about before and after and what they are. Okay, so let's say we have a div. Okay, inside of our HTML we have a div. It looks like this. Okay, and that's the only thing in it. Maybe we have some text in it. Okay, so we have this div with some text in it, and it would look like this: div, and it would have text, and a closing div. Now, if we want to insert some other content, say before it or after this text, we could do it inside the HTML. But if we don't have access to change it in HTML, it is possible to do it through CSS. Okay, so we can target that div, and we can use the before pseudo element. And this before pseudo element, we add some content here. Will insert content inside that div right as the first child. Okay, that's what the before does. After would come as the last child. Okay, so it's a way of inserting elements. Now, your question about the star. Okay, so that is universal, applies to everything. Does not apply to these pseudo elements. So you have to append that to it as well. Okay, so you got to do those as well. So you can do star, then comma, star before, and star after. For our purposes, we're not using before or after, so it's not necessary. All right, good question. Now, other things we need to do, other maintenance issues. We need to add, we're going to add some HTML tag and a body tag. And we're going to set some width of 100% and height of 100%. Okay. You would think these would be defaulted by the browser. They're not. So you generally have to add them so that elements inside it, particularly the main element, which we're going to add here, that way it makes sure it has the full height of it. This is particularly true when we're not dealing with content. Okay, when there's no content, we're not going to have any content when we're building this. So we need this to kind of bake the space. Okay. One more thing we're going to add with this is we're going to add a display flex to this. Again, this just makes it a little easier to force that width and height. All right, so that's it for now. Okay, so let's go ahead and just save that for now. We're going to add some more, lots more to our CSS file. But let's go ahead and jump back to our index.html file, and let's start building out the structure, the HTML structure for our site. Okay, so let me bring up our mockup again here, and let me put them side by side so that we can look at them and we can add the structure. All right, so what do we see right at the top? We have that big banner. Okay, so that's right at the top. What kind of tag would we want to use for that? Oh, make it larger? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, sitting all the way back there, it's hard to see. Understandable. Okay. All right, so first, our header. Or our banner, what do we want to call it? What tag? It's at the top. Typically use header, right? It's a good syntactic tag to use. So we're just create the header tag here. Okay, and we'll just put in the text header here. Again, we're going to change that later, but that's just so we have some text. All right. What's next? We're going to ignore anything inside of here. Next, we have this little section right here. Okay, so I'm just going to call this the intro section. I don't know what it's really supposed to be, but I'm just going to call it the intro section. So we're going to create a section tag, and we're going to add the intro class to it. Now, another little shortcut for Emmet. If you type in the tag name, say section, and then do dot the class name, and you can hit tab, it's going to create that tag for you with the class already inside, already added. Okay? Okay, and then again, I'm going to add some text for intro. Scroll up here so I'm not at the bottom. Next, we have this about section with these different little blocks. Okay, so again, we're going to create another section tag here. We're going to call it about. Again, we're just looking at high level right now. We'll dive a little bit deeper into it. All right, so this next one is supposed to be assuming it's supposed to be a video, so we'll call it video. So we'll add a section dot video. And after that is the feature projects. So we'll create a section called projects. I forgot video up here. This text that I'm adding is just to provide some content so that when we're viewing this in the browser, we know which sections are. Which is the section. Okay, so that's the projects, and the last one is the footer. Okay, and we'll just use the footer tag for that. Footer, tab, and we'll add footer. Okay, so at the very highest level, these are the different sections. Now there's one more thing that we need to add for this. And remember I said that this site and a lot of sites are actually at the very highest level a column. Okay, and what we've created here are the rows. So we need a parent for all of these. Now we could use the body, but I highly discourage you from using the body for layout. Okay, the body along with the HTML tag generally should just be left alone. So we're going to add one more tag here, and we're going to add a main tag that surrounds all of this. Okay, so we'll go from the very top, we'll add main here, and we'll move our closing tag right at the bottom, right after our footer. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. And I'm going to remove my mockup here. Let's go ahead and open up our page into our browser. So to do that, again, if you've installed Live Server, that's an excellent way of doing it. So if you just right-click on your index.html page, inside the context menu at the very top, there says Open with Live Server. If you click on that, it will open the page in your native or your default browser. Now what we're going to see is this, which is not all that inspiring. So we're going to add some styling here to at least get to see something, right? Okay, so let's go back to our code and let's go back to our CSS and let's add some extra styles. Again, these styles are solely to add some structure so we can see things. Yeah. So to open with Live Server, we right-click on index.html. You get your context menu up. At the very top, it says Open with Live Server. If you don't have Live Server, it is an extension that needs to be installed. So if you do not have it, install it. Make sure, yeah, there you go. Yep. Yeah, you open it from your project. Okay, so what we're going to add here, again, we're just going to add some base styles to make things show up. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to update our main. Okay, so I'm going to update our main tag. We're going to add a width of 100% so that it spans the entire way. We're going to add a max width of 1200 pixels. This way it doesn't go any larger than that. So even though screens have gotten much larger with much higher pixels, as human beings, we still can't read text that go that long. So generally, 1200 pixels is a good number. Some people go a little bit larger than that. But generally, you don't want to go more than that. Okay, and then we're going to add some margin. We'll add it 0 and auto. This is to center it when it hits above 1200 pixels. So really quick, this width of 100%, we need this because we've added this display flex to our body and HTML. So remember when you add display flex, it converts the children inside to a inline block instead of a block element. So therefore, they're only taking up enough width, they're only taking the width that is necessary, not the full width. So to counteract that, we're going to set it to width 100%. Okay, so that spans the. Next, we're going to affect the header, section, and footer tags. Oops, missed a comma there. So header, comma, section, comma, footer. So we're going to do all of those. And we are going to set their padding to 25 pixels all around. The margin to 5 pixels. This is to give some separation. And we're going to set their background color to EA. Just the light gray. Let's go ahead and save that. We can take a look at what we got there. All right, so we have this right here so far. Okay, so again, all we got is some bars going across. They're only taking up enough, they're only taking the space that is necessary for their content. So remember, CSS and HTML are all about the content, the text. And so by default, they only take up the space that is required for the text. We can override that and force that to be different. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to switch our main to be a Flexbox container. We're going to make it a column. And then we're going to add flex grow to these elements so that they will take up the full space, take up the full 100% of our page. Okay? This will actually get overwritten a little bit later because we're going to actually add height to things, but we'll start with that. Okay? So let's go ahead and go back to our main. We're going to set this to display flex. And we're going to set our flex direction to be column. Okay? Again, we're converting our main to be a column, so everything else becomes rows. Now, let me take a real quick note. You'll notice that I jump around a lot inside of my CSS elements and where I put my properties. I do have a rhyme and reason for why I do things the way I do. It doesn't quite make sense to probably anybody but me. Some people say that you should write all your properties in alphabetical order. And that's a good structural way to do it. But I don't like to do it that way because it means you'll separate elements that belong together. Okay, so for example, display flex and flex direction belong together. They're both talking about how the element will display its children. So I like to group those things together, and I like to add spaces between the things I'm grouping together inside my CSS. So if you have a question why I jump around a lot, that's why. All right, so we have our main set to flex. It's now a flex container. We want to add the flex grow property to these elements so that they will grow. All right. Okay, so there we go. Now if we come back, go back to our browser, we can see that, yeah, now the elements are growing, are filling up 100% of the page. Okay? That's what we want. Okay? Again, we're going to override the flex grow with some height here in a moment. Any questions about what we did so far? Again, mostly what we're doing is just setting up our layout so we can see it. because we're going to have to jump back and forth to keep constantly looking at it to see if it's matching what our mockup looks like. Okay. In fact, let's take a look at our mockup again. I'm going to open this up so I can see it in full screen. Go by side by side. Okay, so here's our mockup. Now that we have that very base structure looked at, now we'll jump into each one of our rows. Okay, so the first row is our header. So let's take a look at that, and let's make some decisions about our header. Okay, so the first thing is our header has a navigation element, which we're going to need to add. We haven't added that yet, but we're going to need to add that. And then it has that text in sort of right in the center of it with the call to action button. Right? It's also supposed to, we can imagine, supposed to take up a majority of the page's height when the page loads. So when page loads, that's all the visitor sees, maybe just a little bit of the next section. That tells us that we need to add a significant amount of height for the viewport. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to work on the header style here, the header section. So I'm going to do header section here. And I am going to affect the header. So add my header style. And first thing I'm going to add is the height. Okay, so I'm going to add some height here. And I'm going to add it as 80 VH. Now, if you're not familiar with the VH unit, it's viewport height. So depending on how high your browser window is, it's going to take up 80% of that. Now, we might want to put in a min with height here. Generally, we just let the content handle that part, though. The content will keep it from going any smaller than it needs to. So we'll just leave it as height. Okay, and we can now see that it's setting that. Okay. Now you'll notice that this is actually not 80%. That's because the rest of this is still wanting to take up some of that height from the main. Okay, because remember we set this all to be flex grow, so it's wanting to take up the space. We're going to fix that here in a moment. Okay. But let's go back to our HTML and let's add those extra components that are supposed to be inside of our header. Okay, so we need this navigation in there, and we need this call to action. I'm sorry, I'm probably going too fast for people. I apologize. Question? Okay, you need to set your flex direction. Flex direction.
Yeah.
Oh, you're missing the main tag? Yeah, it goes around everything. Yep. So far, good. There's the question over here. Oh, VH. So VH stands for viewport height. So the height of your window, of your viewport, that's the viewport height. And 80 means take 80% of that. Now, we're not seeing 80%, and that's because we have this Flexbox, this display flex here. Okay? When we add the display flex, it is limiting our content to the height of main. So everything needs to say it. It's not causing, you notice it doesn't scroll. Okay? It's not forcing it beyond it. Okay? We can fix that by just basically removing the display flex. I didn't catch that. So let's take this away and I'll show you what I think you're asking. I'm going to go ahead and take this display flex away because we actually want to take it away. I do apologize. We're going to take that away. And now you notice that our header is much bigger. We do have a scroll bar here. Now, if I were to, say, inspect here so I can adjust my size. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so now I can affect this. You can see that my header, as I decrease the size of my viewport, changes as well. Okay, so that's what viewport height means. Okay, it's always going to be 80% of your viewport. Okay, which means that when the user loads the page, 80% is going to be just this header. Right, we deleted the display flex on main. You can delete the flex direction now. That doesn't have any, not doing anything. And this is part of doing design and web development. You're constantly making, oh, nope, that didn't work. Need to change that. Okay? You're constantly checking back and forth to see how things look. All right, so let's go back and let's add the extra elements we needed for our header. Okay, so if we go back to our image, our mockup here, we can see that we need this navigation and we need this text with this button. What kind of structure do you see here inside of the header? Not HTML structure. What kind of layout structure do we see here? We see, you know what, let me jump back to that. We'll jump back to that in a moment. But right now we need something for our navigation and something for this text right here. Okay? So let's go ahead and add that structure to our, and then we'll go back to what I was talking about, the layout. So we're just going to add a nav here. Yeah, what's that? Nav. We're going to give it a class of nav. Now inside of here, it will have multiple links. So the first link I'm going to add is going to have a nav logo, class of nav logo, like that. And inside there, we're going to add mockup. Okay, so we just create a link with a class of nav logo. And now we're going to create 4 more links, all with the same class. Right? So I'm going to show you another shortcut with Emmet here. So when you want to create multiple elements of the same type, we can do a, so for example, a.nav-link. You can add the asterisk and the number you want. So the asterisk is the little star, and then the number 4, because we want 4 of them. And then you can hit tab. And that will create 4 versions of that link. Okay, yeah, I'm going to do that again. Okay. So we want to do a.nav-link, then the asterisk, 4. Okay, so we're going to create 4 of them. Right? I'm going to hit tab, and that will create the 4 versions for me. Right? Lots of shortcuts. Saves time. Okay, now we're going to add some text in between our links here. We're going to add a work. Again, this is just off our mockup, so features. You really can add whatever text you want. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so I just have work, features, blog, and contact. Again, we just want some content in there so we can kind of see what this looks like. All right, so that's our nav. And now we're going to add a div after our nav for that call to action section. That's this section right here. Okay, so we're going to create a div. And we'll just call it CTA, call to action. And this call to action has an H1 in it. Okay, so we'll call H1. And it has some text in it. Okay, so I'm just going to type in title. It really doesn't matter what the text is. And below our title is, we're going to call it an H4 because it's something smaller. So right here's our H1, and we're just going to call this an H4. Okay, so we'll do H4. And it has a lot of text in it. So there is a way of outputting lorem ipsum with VS Code. If you just type in lorem, like that, L-O-R-E-M, and then hit tab, it would output some lorem ipsum text. So if you're ever developing a design and you just need to fill it up with some text, that's a quick way of doing it. Okay, I'll do that again. So you just inside my H4 here, I'm going to type in lorem. And again, this is another emit shortcut. And then I can just hit tab, and it outputs it. Yep. Okay. So if it's spanning out all the way, that's just because you don't have wrapping on. So, right, there is. I never remember what this is because I just turned it on and then I forget about it. Yeah. So right here under View, there's Toggle Word Wrap, and that will just wrap your text rather than spanning it all one line. And it wraps based off your window. Okay. Last thing we need is a button below this, so we can just add a button, and we're just going to call it View Our Projects. All right, let's go ahead and save that now, and we'll jump back and we'll take a look. Okay, we got some content in there. Not looking at anything like our mockup yet, though. So let's work on that. So let's go back to our mockup. And let's take a look at our mockup. For the header only, that's this section right here, what kind of structure do we see here? Right? We have this navigation is one element, and we have this contact right here. As a layout, what is that? They're stacking on top of each other. 2 rows, right? 2 rows. So what does that mean our header needs to be? If they're rows, our header is a column. Okay? Remember, we're dealing with rows or column. Is it a row or is it a column? Okay? So it means our header is a column. So when we need to add Flexbox to this, we need to convert it to be a column. So our navigation and our contact can be rows. This is what you have to think. When working with Flexbox, this is what you have to think about because we're only working with one dimension. I am using Chrome. What you're seeing is Chrome. Oh, sorry, that's because I'm in the responsive mode. Let me switch that. There you go. That's what you're seeing. When you're in responsive mode, it views it as a mobile device would see it, which is without a button. Apologize, I turned that on earlier. Okay, so let's jump back down to our style sheet and let's start affecting our header. So now that we have determined that our header needs to be a column, so that navigation and our call to action needs to be rows, let's go ahead and do that. So we can add display flex to our header, and we're going to add a flex direction to be column. Now, if we save this, we're probably not going to see a whole lot of difference. Okay? In fact, we're not going to see any difference. Because when you turn flex direction to column, it looks exactly the way it does if you were dealing with just block content. Okay? But by adding flex to it, we're given a lot more power to manipulate what we're doing. So the one thing we want to do is we want to add flex grow to our call to action so that it takes up the rest of the available space. Okay? Because our navigation only needs as much as it needs, and we want the call to action to take up the rest. So we're going to do CTA, and we're just going to add flex grow. We're going to set it to 1. So remember that grows it out. Okay, I'm going to also add in a background color here. We'll probably take this off later, but just so you can see this, I'm just going to add red. It's going to be really ugly, but it makes it really visible. Okay, so flex grow red. Okay, so now if we come over, you can see that, yeah, it's taking up all this space. Remember, it would only take up the amount that it needed, but now it's taking up all this because of that flex grow. We're going to take that red off because it's horrible. Let's go back to let's talk about our navigation. Now that we got that going, let's talk about our navigation. So right here's our navigation. What is our navigation layout-wise? It is a row. Okay, so if we want to set this up for display flex, we just set display flex. Row is default. Okay. So remember, you got to keep switching. Because Flexbox is single dimension, we have to keep adding more Flexbox containers. Okay, so we're going to adjust our nav here. And we're going to set it to display flex. And if we go back here, we can see that it's cramming all of our content together. Why is it doing that? Well, yes, there's no margin, but why is it cramming it all together? Right, it only takes the space it needs, and what's the default justification? Justified content. Flex start, which crams everything to the start, right? How can we get them to spread out? Right, we could use like space between, right? We could set them all to be space between or space evenly or space around. One of those, right, would work. Let's go ahead and add some justification here. So let's add justify content, and let's do space between. Okay, so we get something like that, okay? Is that the way our mockup is set up, though? No. What does our mockup look like? It's got one link over here by its own, and the rest are all over on the other side. Right, you're right. So we need to use the margin auto. We don't want to do the row reverse. So the row reverse actually reverses the elements themselves. So we don't want to do that. But you're right, on the margin auto. So we don't want to do justify content here. That was just demonstration. So we're going to take that out. And now we're going to target that nav logo. I'm going to add margin right auto. So nav logo, we're going to do margin right auto. Okay, if we go back, we can now see that we have mockup over here, and the rest are all crammed over there. Okay, now, if we wanted space around our links, as was brought up, we can add margin or padding around them. Okay, so to add some extra padding. We're not going to be worried too much. We're not going to worry about that right now. Okay, but if we wanted some extra space, we can do that. Okay, we're going to leave them as there is for now. Let's look at our the call to action. If we look at our call to action section, which is basically this entire section right now in our mockup, how do we get the text and button to be kind of in the middle? Say it again. So you're using the wrong terms, but you're kind of on the right idea. So we need to do justify content, center, and align items, center. Okay, use both of them, center. That will center the content. Okay, so in our CTA, we need to do that. But what do we need to do before we do justify content and align items? We need to display flex, right? We need to convert it to a flex container. Okay, lots of flex containers here. So display flex, then we'll do justify content, center, and align items, center. All right, and if we go back, we can see that it looks like that. Oh, why does it look like that? What do we need to do to fix that? Not flex wrap. What is it doing? What is our call to action now? Is it a row or a column? It's a row, and what do we want it to be? We want it to be a column, right? So we need to add flex direction, column. Okay, that's looking better. Yep. All right, so just in this little bit we've already covered, we've added display flex to almost every element we're working with. Okay, that's the way Flexbox is. Okay, because it's only one dimension, we're constantly having to switch so that we can align our elements in both dimensions. And you're going to find yourself doing that. Okay, when you're working with Flexbox. Next week we're going to talk about CSS Grid, which automatically works with 2 dimensions, and we don't have to do that. It's really cool. All right, so we're just going to add a couple more things to our call to action. And that's mostly just a width. And we're going to center it. So we're going to add a max width of 800 pixels. And then we'll do the margin 0 auto. That's to center it. And we're going to do text line center. This will align all our text centered. Just those 3 commands. When you got that, your page should look something like this. Okay. Should really get rid of that ugly red. All right, any questions so far about how we're managing? All right, we're going to jump ahead and we're going to skip to the about section because I want to show you how that one works. All right, so we're going to skip to the about section and we're going to work on this real quick. So we're just going to add a couple little things here inside the HTML because we're running, it's taking a little bit longer than I expected. So we're going to I'm just going to show you what we need to do here. So we're going to add a div with a class of text. This is just to add the text at the beginning. And just to keep it simple, we're just going to add a p tag with some lorem ipsum. Okay. It's not exactly the way mockup has it. Just keep it. Outside of our text, below our text div, we're going to add another div here. Oh, I put text. I'm sorry, that should be about text. Below that, we want to have another div with a class of about blocks. This is the blocks that we're going to be creating. So here's the about section, by the way. So here's our text, and these are the blocks that we're going to be creating. Okay, so that's the about blocks. And now we're going to create all those blocks. There's 6 of them. So we're going to use that Emmet shortcut again. We're going to do div.class block, or excuse me, about block times 6. Okay, like that. I'll leave it up so you can see it. div.about-block times 6. We hit tab, and that will create all of them. Okay, we're not even going to add anything in them. We're just going to have those blocks. All right, let's take a look at this section one more time. What do we have right here? A column or a row? It's a column, right? So we want our about section to be a column. Okay, so with 2 rows in it. One is with this text right here, and the other one is with this block. What is this section? Is it a column or a row? It's 2x3. It is a 2x3. But you're right. It is a row that's been wrapped. Okay, so we're going to leave it as a row, and we're going to wrap the elements down. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go ahead and add the styles for that. And this will be the last part we'll do. Okay, so we're going to add for this is for the about section. We're going to add, we're going to create our about element. We talked about this, that it needs to be a column. So we're going to do display, flex, direction, column. Okay. Then we want our, let's add some stuff to our about text section. This is just some simple stuff, no structural. We're just going to add a max width of 800 pixels, margin 0 auto. And we're going to do text aligns. I'll just center everything. Okay, if that's for the about text. And now the last one is our about blocks section. Right? So we talked about it, that it's a row that is being wrapped. So what properties do we need to add to it? We need to add what comes before flex wrap. Display flex. Do blocks. Let's do display flex. And we want to do flex wrap. Wrap. Okay. So, and to add some to add some space for our blocks, because they won't take up space on their own because there's no content in them, we're going to add some extra stuff here. So we're going to do about block. We're going to add some width. We'll set the min width. Sorry, we want to set the min width to be 280 pixels. The min height to be 300 pixels. And we're going to add a margin of 15 pixels. Okay. All right. Let's see what we've got so far, because we haven't really looked at our page. We just wrote some stuff out. Let's see what we got so far. Okay, we're looking at this. Oh, you know what? We're not even going to see those blocks because they're invisible. We need to add a background here. Let's add a background color of white. Okay. Background color of white. Okay, so there we go. It's a little hard to see on that gray. I do apologize. Maybe choose the darker color. So here's a block, here's a block, here's a block. We can see that they're being wrapped around. That's very close to what we have for our mockup. There's a couple more things we need to do. Right? So one thing, if we look at our mockup, we can see that they're kind of being pushed to the edge on both sides. Well, actually, how can we get the columns? Because right now, let me actually change this to be a darker color. I'm going to set these to be black for me. There we go. That's what they look like. They're off to the side of our page. How can we get them to be more centered? We can use the justify content, right? And this is where we can play around with it. We can do justify content. We could try center. Let's see what center looks like. Okay. That looks okay. There's probably a little bit more space on the edges here than we might like. So maybe we want space between. Okay, maybe that's too much space. Okay, this is where you can play around with it depending on what you want. All right, so I think we'll go back to center because I think that actually looks the best for what we want. All right, so now let me turn on responsive mode again here so we can see this. So if we size this down, you can see that it's wrapping. Okay, it's automatically responsive already, this section. We don't have to do any more for this at all. So you were talking about, well, what does the mobile version look like? We've made the mobile version by making the large version. Okay? When you're working with Flexbox and CSS Grid, design how you want it to be look, how you want the structure to be look, how you want the layout to look at. Then let it naturally flow. See where it breaks. Then add your breakpoints. Okay? You shouldn't have these arbitrary breakpoints. Oh, I'm going to make it for a tablet. I'm going to make it for a mobile. We don't really need to do that anymore. Okay? With Flexbox and CSS Grid, there's so much responsiveness already built into them naturally that generally you just build the one view and then look for where it breaks. Then you can add the few breakpoints that is necessary. Okay? I wanted to show you that, but I do want to give you some time to work, and we're already further. Right, so navigation, we're going to have to add some wrapping in for our navigation because right now it looks okay, but if we were to add some padding around, you would need it to get wrapped around. So I'm sorry we ran out of time for this. I think I'm going to try and make a screencast demonstrating how to do all of what I'm talking about for this layout. But hopefully this gives you a base idea of how to structure a layout with Flexbox. Okay? Mostly what you need to keep in mind is when you're looking at the layout or at the mockup, is it a column or is it a row? Okay, figure that out. What do those children inside of it need to be? Then structure it that way. And again, you're going to have to nest it and be moving back and forth. Question? Okay, if you don't have it working, I can come around a little bit later and help you out. Again, this is more for demonstration, so it's more of getting the principle than getting the result. All right, any general questions about how this works? Okay, all right. Okay, so let me go ahead and wrap up. We'll talk about the landing page, and then I'm going to give you the rest of the time in class to work. All right, so for your next exercise, you're finishing up page redesign. For your next exercise, it's a landing page. So you're going to be creating the HTML and the CSS for a landing page. You're going to receive a mockup, and you're going to need to build the site or build the page for the mockup. It's a single page. All right, the page that you're building must be functional and responsive, and closely resemble the mockup. So your goal is to have a site that looks as close to the mockup. Now, we're not talking about pixel perfect. You're not going to get that, okay? you're dealing with something that's flexible as opposed to an image that's static. Okay? But you're looking for something that's very close to the mockup. You're going to be provided with all of the assets you're going to need, the images, the fonts, and so forth. You're just going to need to provide the HTML and the CSS. You should use CSS Grid or Flexbox. Now we're going to be covering CSS Grid next week. We've covered Flexbox this week. You need to use one or the other or both. Okay. For the submission of this assignment, you're going to be pushing this to your GitHub Pages account. I will be walking through how to do that in class, okay, when that time comes. Okay, we'll walk through it, how to do that. But you're going to be pushing this to GitHub Pages. Okay, you'll submit the URL to your live site. So once you've pushed up to GitHub Pages, you will be able to view it out on the web, and that's the URL you're going to provide. And this is due February 6th. Okay, so that's 2 weeks from now. Okay, 2 weeks. Any questions about the landing page exercise? All right, so we'll wrap up, and then you can have time to work. So for next time, Tuesday next week, we are going to be we're going to cover CSS Grid. All right? And we're going to talk about that. We have a participation exercise on the grid, which you'll work on. All right. Any final class questions? Okay. Yeah, if you have individual questions, I will come around and help. All right. If there's no other questions, you do have the remaining time in class to work. I do apologize. I meant to give you more time than I did. But you will have the remaining time in class. If there's no other questions.